Live.
I'm back.
It is loading in 3, 2, and 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another workshop with street entrepreneurs. Today, we are lucky enough to be partnering with Pod TV Digital and with Clay, who's going to talk to us about design thinking for entrepreneurs. I believe design thinking is essential to customer discovery, innovation, and to rebuilding your products and services. And without further ado, take it away. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Juliana. Uh, so welcome everyone. I'm sure everyone is ready to dive in and get started with learning a little bit about design thinking. And this is really going to be a design thinking crash course, right? So it's going to be very interactive. What we're also going to do is actually have you actually break out Post-its, or even if you don't have Post-its, grab just some pieces of paper, because we're actually going to use this as a working session to give you an opportunity to start applying design thinking. And really, the whole concept of design thinking is really about finding a new way to solve problems, to solve challenges, right? And so in my mind, though, it's not just about the thinking on the challenge, it's about the doing, right? So this is what this session is going to be all about, is us rolling up our sleeves. See, I already got mine rolled up, and digging in to start applying design thinking. So it's going to be a little bit of learning where we introduce some new concepts, but then it's going to be you actually applying this to solve some of the toughest challenges that you're facing right now. And so I'm going to share a quick PowerPoint. And we'll also share these slides with you afterwards. We'll make sure you're able to get the slides afterwards. And so just to start up here, quick agenda, do welcome, warm-up activity, a little bit of a warm-up activity. Then we're going to get into how do you frame challenges using this design thinking approach. Talk a little bit about how do you brainstorm new solutions, and then how do you begin implementing ideas at low cost, low budget, but making sure you're able to validate that some of the ideas that you're going to have are actually going to have an impact and get you to the desired outcome. In terms of my background, you heard a little bit of introduction. So Clay Richardson, I'm founder and chief accelerator of Digital FastForward. We're a 3-year-old startup that focuses on helping companies drive innovation. So we work with a lot of companies, both large companies ranging from big banks to small companies and startups. And so a lot of what we do is help our clients think outside of the box when it comes to adopting new technology and how they can get the results as quickly as possible, right? And so my background is I come from Forrester Research before launching Digital FastForward. I was lead analyst at Forrester Research covering innovation, digital automation, and design thinking. And so some of my background is in technology. So I love to tinker with new technology. I love breaking things. I guess I fancy myself a hacker, not hacker like breaking into any applications, but more a hacker like really quickly understanding new technology and figuring out how can you actually get value from it, right? And so tips we're getting the most out of today's workshop, just a little bit if for the people that are on Zoom, but really the key to this workshop is to stay engaged, right? And so as we're going through, you're going to have different assignments. We're going to put a timer on and then give you a chance to actually apply the design thinking and then come back. And then if you have questions, if you're in the Zoom, just use the chat window to engage. So we're going to do virtual introductions, right? We're not going to be able to do real time, if you will, introductions. I already introduced myself. But what I want you to take a minute and do is just write down on your, if you could have a piece of paper, just, you already know your name, so don't worry about writing down your name or your role, but just take a minute and write down what your expectation is, what you hope to get out of this session, okay? So I'll give you a minute. Just write down, think about what is it that you hope to be able to get out of this session, right? And then the next piece is I want you to think about a superpower you wish you had. If I could grant you one superpower, what would that be? Right? So I'll give you a minute to write that down, right? If you're in the Zoom, type it in the chat. And so when we do the design thinking crash course, a lot of the expectation that we hear is to really be able to ideate quickly around challenges, right? That's one of the things people understand that design thinking can help with, or even to learn a new superpower, right? Some people look at design thinking. I definitely think of design thinking as a superpower that I have, that I'm able to quickly solve problems and just be creative, where normally, like most of us, how many of you feel that you're creative? Just by a show of hands, right? How many people feel they're not necessarily creative, right? A lot of times we even if we feel like we're creative, sometimes it can be hard to turn that on. And what design thinking gives you is a superpower that you can turn on by just following some simple steps that we're going to show you, right? And so what I'll share with you, maybe my superpower outside of design thinking, a superpower I wish I had, which is I wish I could only have to sleep for maybe 2 minutes a night, because I got a 16-month-old that still does not like to sleep through the night. Gotta work on that. Now maybe I should use design thinking to figure that out. So just the level set in terms of what is design thinking here. So this is a definition that I came up with when I was at Forrester Research, right? And one of my research directors basically challenged me to come up with a definition for design thinking. And I kind of looked at him like, okay, well, why do you want me to come up with one? There are millions out there, right? And so when I stepped back and said, you know, what does design thinking really give people the power to do? And basically, it's a set of practices that helps individuals and teams identify with customer experiences and shift from logical problem solving, which is normally how we solve problems. We look at all the data, try to figure out what the best path is, right? Instead of using that logical sequence, design thinking gives us a way to do creative experimentation. So we can use creativity to brainstorm, to put ourselves in the customer's shoes, and understand what some possible scenarios are. And so this design thinking, in my opinion, we've been working with a lot of clients throughout the last 3 months that are ramping up quickly on design thinking. And design thinking was really built for times like what we're in, because we don't know what 3 months, 6 months, 12 months are going to look like. And so we can't rely on how things worked in the past in order to come up with solutions in the future. We have to actually start experimenting and doing it very rapidly. And so design thinking, we've just found with clients we're working with, have given them this way to quickly ideate, quickly in a day, come up with really new, powerful ideas. And again, small companies, large companies, we're seeing this everywhere. And you'll see design thinking sometimes compared to systems thinking. And, you know, systems thinking is a whole approach to solving really tough problems like systemic challenges like racism. You'll see systems thinking being used, or, you know, improving health outcomes. Systems thinking is used. And usually systems thinking is looking at very broad problems that could take generations to solve, right? Design thinking is all about finding specific touch points or interaction points, a very small problem or challenge you're facing. I say very small, but a smaller problem or challenge you're facing, and then quickly ideating through it. And you'll actually see these used a lot together. I've even seen systems thinking workshops where they broke problems down, like improving health outcomes. Actually, one of the clients I worked with, in the past, we use systems thinking to look holistically at the problem. And then we found what are the 3 or 4 key areas in improving health outcomes that need to be transformed. And so we use system design thinking to address that, right? And so when we look at this, just to give you an idea of why design thinking is so critical for businesses, for entrepreneurs right now, and I'm using design thinking to even rethink my business, right? Is systems thinking, you're thinking about things in a very holistic way. You're looking further out into the future. With design thinking, I'm just looking at a specific challenge that I'm facing and I need to solve in a shorter time frame. With systems thinking, it's all about, linkages, finding all the relationships and how are things connected. With design thinking, it's all about context. Let's just understand what are the things that are relevant very quickly and use that to drive towards outcomes. Systems thinking is very logical, right? We're thinking logically. I think I can never remember if it's left side of the brain or right side, but I think it's left side of the brain that's kind of logical. With design thinking, it's really more about empathy. It's about how can I put myself in my customer's shoes and start to look at the problem from their perspective and start designing to solve that challenge. I recently published a blog on design thinking for digital resilience. And I wrote this blog because I was reading in a magazine about restaurants, or online about restaurants, opening back up and just putting plexiglass in between customers and, going right back to business, right? And it just surprised me because I was like, well, that's not a high level of empathy because, I don't know if I want to be in a restaurant where I'm eating and I have to worry about, the glass if the person in the kitchen might be sick, right? And so that's not saying you shouldn't do that. It's just when you're designing using design thinking, empathy is at the heart of it. You're putting yourself in the customer's shoes. And this is so critical right now, is empathy has to be an essential part of how you think about your business going forward, because so many people are, regardless of the business that you're in, so many of your customers have a higher level of anxiety, are concerned about safety, even if looking at it from your employee's perspective, right? As an entrepreneur, or even your own as an individual, it's really about that empathy being at the center of how you start reimagining your business, right? Not just looking at like, oh, this is Clay's perspective or me as the CEO, but really saying, okay, from my employee's perspective, how do I need to rethink reopening our office, right? How can I redesign that experience for employees so that they feel comfortable coming in, they feel safe, right? But that has to be the start. And that's what design thinking gives us. Systems thinking is a deductive logic. So if you think about deductive reasoning, we can kind of look at all of the data, make a decision based on the data. Design thinking is abductive. How many of you have heard of abductive reasoning? Right? That I didn't make this up. I promise you, I didn't make it up. But basically, this is a fancy word for methodical brainstorming, right? We're basically just trying to look at a challenge and begin brainstorming on possibilities that may not have existed before. And so it's just a fancy word. It's not about UFOs. It's just about how do we begin to brainstorm once we put ourselves in the customer's shoes, right? Or in our employee's shoes. So the design thinking process itself, this is really what makes design thinking powerful, is anybody can follow these steps. I actually had, we do workshops for clients on design thinking and public workshops on design thinking, similar to this. And one of the attendees that went through one of the workshops actually shared with me that a year later, I ran into him and he said, you know, design thinking saved my marriage. And I was like, is this guy full of BS? like I don't believe it, right? Like sometimes people tell you stuff and you're like, I don't know. But he walked me through how he used design thinking, where he and his wife and his kids were able to build a garden setup out in their backyard. And he felt like if he hadn't had those tools, he and his wife would have just devolved into arguing and yelling and just not being able to get on the same page on what this needed to look like in their backyard. And the key here, regardless of the challenge that you're facing, is design thinking gives you a powerful way to define challenges, right? That's usually a big problem we run into just off the bat. We might have a new idea or we're facing a problem. The first thing we usually do is go with our first idea, like, okay, this idea, I'm going to go spend $20,000, execute it. And then you realize, 2 months later, like, oh no, or however long later, like, oh no, that didn't really address the real problem that people are having or that I was thinking employees had. And so defining the challenge is that first step, framing the challenge from a design thinking perspective. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Observing people, right? This is that empathy part, is actually observing people to understand the problem better, to put yourself in their shoes. This is where Undercover Boss, I think we've all probably seen Undercover Boss, right? Actually interviewed a chief customer experience officer that went undercover in his company to understand better how is it to serve customers. Instead of him being this executive in the executive office suite or whatever, he actually went to the front lines undercover, grew out a beard, the whole nine. It's kind of interesting when he was telling the story, but that's sometimes what we have to do. And I say sometimes, now is essential to get out, actually start talking to customers, understanding what are their concerns, what are their fears, and trying to put yourself in their shoes. Then once we're able to build some empathy, we're able to form insights to really get these deep insights about what's driving people emotionally, right? Again, whether it's a customer, employee, or other, you want to make sure you're able to get these insights very quickly. Then we're able to shift to framing what are the best opportunities where we can have big impact. Then we get into brainstorming ideas. This, to me, the brainstorming part is the funnest piece, is you get to start thinking of these off the wall ideas and brainstorming hundreds of ideas and then prioritizing them. And then the last piece, this is where it's so important as entrepreneurs that we use this, is to try experiments, because we don't have unlimited pools of cash, right? I wish I did, but none of us really have unlimited pools of cash. That's kind of what makes us at least an entrepreneur at the beginning. And so trying experiments is all about very low costs. Like, can I spend less than $100 and less than a day to verify that a particular idea is going to have an impact, that it's going to get the results that I'm looking for? And so when we look at design thinking, the whole idea here is we want to start with desirability. And just think for a second, why do you think we want to start with desirability? Just maybe give a second, give people time to think. Why would we want to start, instead of focusing on viability? Is the idea that I have viable? Is it feasible? Is it something that I have the resources to actually do? Is it feasible? We could start there. Is it viable? Meaning, is it something that's going to be able to carry forward long term? I could start there. Design thinking says, no, start with desirability, because it really isn't going to matter if we put a lot of money into it if nobody wants it, if it doesn't solve a problem. So we have to start here. And the way I learned about design thinking was actually, I had a multi-billion-dollar idea, right? A couple years, this is maybe like 5-6 years ago, where I was like, all right, I'm going to start a travel company, and it was going to be all about walking wine tours, right? Think about that. How many of you love wine? I know there's some stuff going on right now with COVID and the amount of alcohol consumption, but I'm going to raise my hand. I love wine. How many of you love when you go to a new city, just touring around and learning about the city, right? We're talking pre-COVID, right? Love learning about the history. And I was like, I'm going to start a business that's a walking wine tour, right? And I knew this would be great. I have them in every city, just make so much money and I could just retire, just live the life, right? And what I ended up doing is building a whole business plan around the feasibility and saying how much money I needed in order to get from investors to get this going. And one investor actually told me, like, I'm not going to give you any money, but what I want you to do is just go talk to people and verify whether this is something people would even want. Right. And really what he did is open the door to design thinking for me, because I ended up I live in DC. I'm sure a lot of you live in the DC area, but I live in DC. And I just said, okay, using design thinking, I'm just going to go observe people and see if I'm actually solving a problem that they have. And so I went and asked, in front of the White House, it was back in, probably 2011, 2012, actually, maybe a little bit later. But I was in front of the White House and I talked to 20 people about this problem. And I said, hey, do you have trouble finding interesting things to do when you come to a new city? Right? Because in my mind, that was part of the challenge. Talked to 20 people. How many of that 20 people said they have this problem? Okay. I hear some people saying, well, maybe like 5 people said they had a hard time finding interesting things to do. It was 0. Every person I talked to said, no, I'm in DC. I'm in front of the White House, man. I don't want to go on some walking wine tour. I'm here. This is what I came to see. And a tear came out of my eye because my dream had been shattered. But in a half day, I learned that my original idea and the problem I was focused on was not desirable, right? What I was also able to do is pivot very quickly to start understanding, well, what is the real problem? And we learned just in another day, the real problem was people struggle to find the local thing to do and connect with locals. It's not, hey, I don't have interesting things to do. They need help finding the local things, right? And so that's what design thinking was able to do. It actually saved me, it saved me a lot of money and a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, but it also allowed me to accelerate and find the right idea to focus on, or the right problem to focus on, to accelerate. And that's what you're really doing here is you're challenging your assumptions when you're using design thinking. So what I want you to do now, before we jump into the steps, some of the steps around design thinking, is I want you to write out what is a major problem or challenge you're facing right now in your business. That can be, with reopening, planning your comeback, bounce back. That can be, how do I reopen my office for employees? What is a major problem or challenge you're facing in your business? And when we've asked this question before, we've heard everything from, how do I deliver my services while keeping customers safe, right? How do I deliver? Some people have said, like, the challenge I'm facing is I need to be able to deliver what I do more virtually. I used to deliver it face-to-face in the past, right? I was a speaker, like we've seen this, people who are public speakers, and they're saying, well, I used to go to these conferences where there's 5,000, 10,000 people. Like, okay, what do I do now? Like, that's a real problem. My revenue is shrinking, right? Another example we're hearing a lot is Zoom fatigue, right? I mean, we're on Zoom, I'm on Zoom all day. And, people are feeling, especially if you have employees actually, we did an internal meeting with our team, and that was one of the things that came up was like, I'm like, my co-founder actually brought this up. Like, he basically said, 80% of my meetings right now are all on Zoom, when he used to do all these meetings face to face. And when he kind of walked through, it's like, this guy is on Zoom meetings for like 6 to 7 hours a day, nonstop, right? And so we started using design thinking to start rethinking, like, okay, how do we get to a better experience around that, right? Whether that's, if you're going to be on Zoom, how do we make it so it's not fatigue, or if we can scale that back in some way, right? And so at any rate, think about what is a major problem or challenge you are facing in your business. I'm going to write one down too, and I think one of the big challenges we're facing is really looking at how do we reopen our office safely, right? And some of that is really about staff at some point wanting to at least be able to get out of the house on a every other day or once a week, but people wanting to get out of the house, but want to do it safely, right? And so reopen our office safely is going to be mine. Okay, so just make sure you have yours down. And so the next piece here is, or the first step on the design thinking journey, is all about how do we frame our problem or frame a question. So I love this quote by Eero Saarinen. How many of you know who Eero Saarinen is? So for DC people, you better know this. He was the architect of Dulles. So he's a Norwegian architect. And anyways, I'm going to read the quote and then I'll connect it for you here. So frame a question. Always design a thing by considering in its next larger context: a chair in a room in a house in an environment in a city plan, right? And what he's really saying there is, when we're faced with the problem, don't just look at the problem in isolation. We got to look at it, zoom out, and say, okay, what's the container around this problem? What's really surrounding it? And so the example that I gave, and actually before I go to the example, but with this, the reason why Eero Saarinen was kind of said this and how he's connected to it is he's also the architect of the St. Louis Arch. How many of you know, like, what does the St. Louis Arch represent? I'm drawing gateway to the west. I heard somebody say it, gateway to the west, right? And so what he's saying here is, when we're designing and trying to solve a problem, we got to think about that problem in that next larger context. So when he was designing the St. Louis Arch, he was thinking about it not just as, hey, I'm going to do this thing that's going to be by the river. He was thinking about it in the broader context of the US. If you think about Dulles Airport, right? Dulles Airport, that wing in the front of Dulles Airport here in Washington, he's basically thinking about how Dulles is representing this flight, right? And so really, really good architect. Actually, Sidebar is a furniture store right up the street from me, sells antique Swedish furniture. And I was walking by and I saw this amazing chair, and I went in and asked them, who is the designer, right? And they told me Eero Saarinen. It was an Eero Saarinen original. I asked them how much it cost, and they laughed at me and said it's $24K. And they laughed at me knowing that I was not going to be able to buy it. So at any rate, the key here is, when we start down this path, this stage in our design thinking journey, is we have to zoom out to that next context and look at putting empathy, right? Having empathy. So when we frame the problem in that broader context, we want to make sure it's user focused, right? So we also want to make sure it's broad enough that we can uncover areas of unexpected value. And that's really saying we want to make sure it's broad enough that we can find enough solutions and ideas that something could be executable. And then we want to make sure it's narrow enough, right? So that it's manageable. We don't want to just have a broad topic where we can't really figure out like where are some potential opportunities, and it ends up being abstract. And so just to give you an example here, one of the clients we worked with, this is a big box retailer, right? So you think about, they compete against Amazon. I'm sure you bought some electronics from these guys. But one of the things they were looking at in using design thinking is this first challenge: frequent breakdowns in our order life cycle process lead to a high number of customer complaints, frustrations, and dissatisfaction, right? That was the initial problem that they shared with us. So if I think about this, one, is it user focused? Do you think this is user focused? So that's our first guideline when we're framing a challenge. Is it user focused? I would say no, it's not user focused, right? It doesn't even reference a user in it other than customer complaints, right? Doesn't reference a user in it. So we know it's not user focused. So that's the first thing we have to do when we're framing a challenge from a design thinking perspective, is make sure that a user is defined or included in the problem from their perspective, right? And so we tighten this up a little bit where we said, okay, how might we automate order lifecycle process in order to stop disappointing customers? There's a little bit of customer in there, but still not very customer oriented. Just right, how might we transform the order experience to build trust with customers? That's a little bit better, I would say, because we got the customer in there. And then too broad is, how might we reduce the number of order lifecycle complaints from customers, right? And so really this is just right. We iterated on this multiple times. So it wasn't just we stopped here, we kept going, right? So if we go back to our challenge, the challenge you wrote down, like my challenge here, reopen our office safely. Okay. Before we jump in here, I'm just going to let you know, when we're framing a challenge from a design thinking perspective, we use these three magic words. How might we at the beginning? Why do you think we use those three magic words? Okay. I can hear somebody saying, well, Clay, it's very open-ended, right? Like the how might, and then the we is very collaborative. So we make sure when we set this up, if we were to say, how should we? That's not very open-ended, because it's basically going to say, well, there must be one right solution. And we're saying, no, we want to open it up so we can ideate on multiple solutions, right? How can we? Same idea. Obviously, we don't want to say, how should you, or how might you, because it's not very collaborative. So when we open up with how might we, it really invites participation, invites possibility, right? So if I start with my, reopen our office safely, right? So I can change this, right? And I recommend when you're doing this, particularly if you're doing it with a team, even if you're doing it by yourself, is use these big stickies are very helpful, because you can do this, take the sticky, write it out, and then you can put it on the wall. You can't see the wall, but the idea is you can put them up on the wall and have dozens of these. How might we? So my first challenge is I need to put this in the how might we. Sometimes you'll see it framed as HMW, just shorthand. So I can say, how might we reopen our office safely? So my first question to you with this one, reopen our office safely. My first question to you is, does that include a user, an employee, or a customer? No, I would say it doesn't yet. There's an implied user, but I'll take this, right? So I'm not going to throw it away. I'm just going to stick it on the wall, my invisible wall back there, right? And then now I need to think about, like, how do I get the user in there? So you want to think about this with yours. Who's the user? So for mine, I would say, how might we reopen our offices so employees feel they have options for where they work, right? How might we, actually, I would just say, how might we give employees options for working away from home? Right? Okay, so I have a little bit of user in there, but now I have to ask myself this question. Is it too broad? Is it too narrow? Right? And so when I look at this, I feel like this is pretty broad. And I look at it like, okay, options for working away from home. That's pretty broad. Actually, may not be super broad, but I think I can make this a little bit narrow, right? Because it really, we may want to say something like, to make it a little bit more narrow, I can say, how might we give employees flexibility in when and where they work, where they get work done? Let's say something like that. That still feels a little bit broad, but the idea is, how might we give employees flexibility to go into the office or work from home safely? Okay. So the idea here, I'm not going to go fully through this, but you get the idea, is you want to keep iterating until you get to a good place. But most importantly, you want to make sure, a lot of times as entrepreneurs, and I'm guilty of this, I think, we use design thinking to actually come up with the idea of the business that we're leading now. And my first how might we was, how might we generate revenue so we can eat? Right? Like that's a great how might we, but the problem is, I mean, this sounds horrible, especially with street entrepreneurs, is most people don't care if you eat, right? They're not going to buy your service just to say, hey, I want to make sure Clay eats. And so I have to make sure I'm putting the person in and reiterating across this so that it focuses on a customer and what their benefit will be. So I'm gonna settle on mine as something along the lines of, how might we give employees flexibility on when they can work in the office, right? And give them that option. So we can start there. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you a minute here to just go ahead and write out a few how might we's. Give you a minute to write out a few how might we's, and then select one that has the user, is broad enough and narrow enough, right? So has the user in there, is user oriented, is broad enough and narrow enough, okay? And so we're going to give you a minute just to go through that. So go ahead and get it written down. And I'm just going back to the little cheat sheet that I gave you earlier. So user focused, broad enough to allow you to discover areas of unexpected value, narrow enough to make the topic manageable. Okay. Let's go ahead and write that down. Okay. All right. Okay, so now this next piece is this next step in the design thinking journey is to observe customers, right? So this quote from Steve Jobs, a lot of people don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? And what Steve Jobs was saying, I'm sure most of you have heard this quote in some shape, some form or another from Steve Jobs, but essentially what he was saying is that a lot of times you have to, you need to not rely on focus groups and talking to people to say, hey, what do you want, right? Because they're not going to know until you've actually built something and shown it, right? If you think about it with the iPod, which is what he was referring to, it's like, okay, if Steve Jobs would have went around and asked people what they want in a new MP3 player, they might have said, hey, I want it to be a certain color, or maybe I want it to be bigger, or, I like my Jambox. I want an MP3 player that looks and feels like my Jambox. Who knows, right? And so what we need to do, and especially as we're starting to rethink our businesses, right? Rethink our business models and how we operate, is we need to start to look for inspiration, right? Where do you go to find inspiration? Where do you go to find inspiration? Best place to look is actually your customers or people that might be future customers of your product or service. And so when we're looking for inspiration, we're also trying to observe and see, what are people saying about the problem? What are they doing about the problem? How are they feeling, right? They're looking at their heart. What are they thinking when it comes to this problem, right? And so on one side, the think and feel helps you build empathy, and then the say and do gives you concrete evidence around what a person, how they may be approaching the problem, right? And I know one design thinking team, this is why this is so important, this type of observation. One design thinking team was working on redesigning the experience in a grocery store. This is in the UK. And they were observing people in the produce aisle, and they noticed a shopper, a lady, she took a grape and just popped the grape in her mouth, right? How many of you guys have done that? Just gone to the grocery store, gone to the grocery store, and you're like, hey, I'm going to try this. Boom, right? I haven't done it. I've definitely seen people do. I saw somebody do at the Olive Bar. I was like, really? Like, come on. But at any rate, but this group, this design thinking team, saw this lady like taste the grape, checked it out. They went up to her later and said, hey, we're doing some customer observation, just trying to, see why people shop here and what the experience is like. And they said, well, what is the number one thing you look at when it comes to produce in terms of whether you buy it or not? What do you think she said? Right? I hear people saying whether it's fresh, whether it tastes good. No, she actually said the price, right? At the end of the day, what we saw, you would have assumed that it was based on the taste, but what she said to us was the price. And that's why we do this type of observation, is we don't want to make assumptions. We don't want our biases to come in. We want to be able to observe, take notes. What did they say? What did they do? Okay, what were they thinking? What did they feel, right? And so when we're doing observation, we're basically going to be writing down, just taking notes. Sometimes you'll see teams, and we'll work with teams where they'll actually give customers a photo journal, right? They'll basically say, okay, for this week, we want you to take pictures when you're working through or dealing with this problem. And then we want you to just take notes. Like we've done this with one of the clients we work with is Nestle. And they've done this with different new products where they'll have a team, they'll give customers, I should say, cameras to take pictures of how are they interacting around a particular problem. And they're able to use this to get real time, I say real time, but short time frame understanding of how is a customer navigating a particular problem. So my encouragement to you is to get out and actually start observing customers, set up times to talk to them, not ask them, hey, is this a great product or not, but actually trying to understand with the problem that you're focused on, how are they addressing it with my problem, right? And again, this doesn't have to be about customer, like external customer, it can be about employees. And so with my problem, what I would do is I'd actually start just having conversations with employees, with our staff, and saying, hey, how are you feeling about this, COVID and being at home all the time? Oh, I hate it, man. Like my dog is barking when I'm on calls. The baby is like riding on the dog. Like, well, I just out of control. Right? It's just out of control. And and I can take that. And before I start trying to say, hey, here's a solution, I've started to get into the problem, right, a little bit deeper and understand, how are they feeling about this before I start ideating. The other piece to observation, this is really critical, is we're trying to innovate, right? And so when we're trying to innovate, we can't just go talk to our average customer. If we talk to our average customer is going to give us really not a whole lot of inspiration. They're going to give us kind of average ideas, or, hey, this is what I'm seeing, or they're not going to give you anything to go like, okay, that's a very different point of view, right? And so you want to look for these extremes, right? Extreme users drive inspiration. And so if let's say I'm starting a new laundry service, right? I'm launching a new laundry service in time of COVID. Who might be my extreme users, right? I mean, an easy one is health workers, right? That's an extreme user where they're going to need a higher level of potential cleaning, and there's big risk, right? But that's an extreme user. Other extreme users might be families with 5-6 kids, right? That's pretty extreme. If I just go to the average user and I say, okay, anybody that normally gets their clothes dry cleaned, I'm not going to get any new inspiration, right? And that's really what this is about, is coming up with finding those customers that are extreme where I can get some new inspiration, new ideas, spark my thinking, right? And so what I want you to do for a minute is write down, just again, on your piece of paper, if you have a smaller sticky, either way, but just write down, for your problem, who are your extreme users, right? Again, whether it's internally focused and it's, who would be your extreme employees, if you will. If it's externally focused, who would be those extreme customers for your problem, right? So just think about that, maybe write a few down. Again, going back to my challenge, who are my extreme employees in this scenario? And I definitely have a couple. There's one extreme employee who never stopped going to the office, right? Actually, that's me. Right? I still kept going to the office. I flew out to California, went to our other office, and it was just like, people were looking at me like, are you okay? Dude, right? But then I have on the other side, my germaphobe employee, and that's probably not the right term, politically correct, if you would, but employees that are really like, I'm never going outside again. I don't go outside to go walking. I don't go outside to go running. I don't want to see people. Don't even look at me, right? Those are the people that I want to talk to, because if I talk to this employee that's like, I'm not going outside ever, and just help me understand how you're feeling about this. Like, how are you thinking about the office, the future? That employee may tell me like, you know what, again, I'm never going back into the office, right? Then it really gives me inspiration to start thinking like, okay, well, what does a solution look like potentially for that persona, right? And so we want to identify those extreme users. Now, if I go to the average user who says, yeah, I want to come in every once in a while, I'm good. I already know that's a potential solution, right? I want to find those extremes so I can start thinking from an innovative standpoint. Like, how do we do this? How do we actually allow people to come in and work in a flexible manner? And so when we're going and doing observations, when we're looking at extreme users and doing our interviews, we want to make sure we are talking to or looking at workarounds and adaptations. So really saying, okay, if I'm talking to a user or employee, what are things they're doing as a workaround, right? What are they doing in terms of adapting to this particular problem? We also want to put ourselves in the user's shoes. What are things that they care about? Like this middle graphic was from a child furniture manufacturer where they started getting under the table where the kids are. And how many of you have gone under a child's table to look at what's under there? Right? Yeah, no, it's not good, right? It's really the adults putting like gum and all of this. And so it's really this furniture manufacturer was crawling under the table to really look up and see like what do kids see and how do we design furniture that's more engaging for them. We also want to look for surprises, right? I love this sign. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a sign like this. I don't know if you see the stop sign, if you can see that well, but it's like this one city, let me go back. This one city ordered crosswalk signs that pointed the wrong way for all, and I shouldn't say all the wrong way. They basically ordered one direction crosswalk signs, not realizing, oh, actually, we're going to have people going the other way in some of these streets, right? And so we want to look for these things that surprise us. So when you're talking to customers, definitely have your antenna up for surprises, right? Like if I'm talking to my employees or my staff about reopening and how do we, and somebody's saying, well, you know, the person that's kind of in the house, let's say, and doesn't want to go out again is like, you know, it gets really lonely from time to time when I'm at home. But I talk to, you know, this Zoom group, support group, right? That helps me. That may be a surprise where I'm like, okay, let me take that down, right? That might be a workaround or an adaptation that I want to have my antenna up for. The key here is once you capture all of this information from observation, we recommend putting it together in a empathy map, or you'll hear this referred to as a persona map. And this captures all of our findings, what people are seeing, saying, hearing, what are the pains and gains, thinking and feeling. You'll be amazed when you do this, how much empathy you build with customers, where you stop thinking about your problem and you really take ownership of what is the customer's pain. It's a very subtle thing, but it's very pivotal in terms of getting you to start thinking very differently. It's a shift. And so we'll share this template with you also. I work with the team to share this out, but definitely use this when you're having these customer interviews, customer observations to really capture all of what you got back in the observation. Okay, and then the last piece here, and we'll wrap up, is starting to brainstorm, actually. So this brainstorming is all about generating a lot of ideas, right? This is Linus Pauling, 2 times Nobel winner, scientist, says the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. That seems obvious, right? But a lot of times we stop at our first 1 or 2 ideas and say, like Clay, like what I did. I got $1 million, $1 billion idea. I'm off to the races, right? What this gives you the power to do is brainstorm very rapidly. But there's some rules you want to follow, particularly if you're brainstorming in a group. And I recommend, even if you're a solo entrepreneur and you're going through the design thinking process, find a few partners to work with to help you stretch your thinking, right? And so when you're doing this, you want to lay down some guidelines like defer judgment. When you're brainstorming, defer judgment. Don't judge other people's ideas when they're brainstorming. More importantly, don't start judging your idea when you're brainstorming yet, right? You want to make sure you're in a place where you can just write the idea out on a sticky, put it on the wall, right? Encourage wild ideas. It's the wild ideas that often create real innovation, right? It's always easy to bring ideas down to earth later. So we always say, I try to push people really hard, like, okay, for this idea, what would it look like if we had a time machine, right? If to address this problem, right? So I throw these sort of what they call idea defibrillators to spark new thinking And so we encourage wild ideas. Build on ideas of others. That's another important one. This is critical when you're working in a team, one conversation at a time when you're brainstorming, right? Because if you have people break off and start having sidebar conversations, a lot of times it kills the whole momentum on coming up with dozens, if not hundreds of ideas, right? And so this last exercise, what we're going to have you do is just take a minute and brainstorm, come up with, we're going to give you exactly 1 minute, just looking at the time, 1 minute to brainstorm 5 or 6 ideas around your original challenge, right? So we're going to give you 1 minute to brainstorm 5 or 6 ideas. And the key here is just, again, if you have a sticky or a piece of paper, just start writing down the ideas around your challenge that you identify. So like for mine, I could say, I'm going to write a few down, but you go ahead and write yours. See if I can get 5 down in a minute. Ooh, I got a good one. I got a really good one. I just thought of another $1 billion idea. Right. So let me see if I can get one more. And then my last one, I'm going to say is, ooh, I got another good one. Ooh, man, I'm on fire. Virtual office background. So I came up with 4, just given the time. So mine was like, I said, what if we could have Zoom work sessions, right? So group work Zoom sessions. So it's like we have the office without going to the office. We could have scheduled work days, so people can schedule a day when they might be in the office by themselves. So we keep it really safe. I love this one though. This is my favorite. Virtual office background. So it's like we can all have the same virtual Zoom office backgrounds, right? And feel like we're in the office, like the Matrix. This might be my absolute favorite. The office comes to you. So it's almost like we drop off a little container type thing, and the office, you can walk out of your door and it's like the office is there for you that day. And we just have like a rotating office, right? So again, super just outside of the box. None of these things may be implementable. I don't know. I don't even care at this point, right? It's just getting the ideas down. And so there are a couple of additional slides here that I will share out with you. I think it's just important to make sure you're experimenting with these ideas. All of the ideas that I had, I could do very simple experiments by just doing a very simple storyboard. Just draw it out, draw how the idea will work, and then go out and test it with people without spending a dime, right? And so there's some tips in here on how to create that storyboard. And so with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to see if we can open up for questions, or if we're out of time. I'll just, yeah.
I think it's okay if we go a little bit over.
Okay.
So we have gotten some questions via Messenger,
Okay.
and I'm just going to read some of them.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
I'm going in order, by the way.
Okay.
So I am a masseuse. How can design thinking help me reimagine service delivery during COVID-19?
Yeah, that's really good, because I think when we look at this, I think you want to start framing the challenge, right? Is really thinking through, what is the real problem from the customer's perspective? Like, again, you might look at it from your perspective, meaning the masseuse. Like from your perspective, it's like, well, how do I rethink my business for generating revenue, which is important. But I think you want to start looking at it from that customer standpoint. Just to give you an example, like I've done a lot of running. Like this is probably the most running I've done in my life. Like every weekend, my wife and I are doing like half marathon or 10K or whatever, right? And I'm like, okay, I actually strained my calf muscle. And I'm just like, really, I need someone who can help me think through how do I do a better job massaging myself, right? And I would pay for that. I may not be ready to go and have a masseuse come to me, but I would say, okay, I have this challenge now that normally I might go to a physio, but that may be too extreme. But I do think, it would be nice to be able to have someone give me guidance, right? There's a lot of things you want to frame it from that point of view, like how might we help people uh, improve self-care through massage, right? And people will pay for that, right? But I think if you start from that framing of, what is the customer, the challenge that they're facing that you can help them with, right? I like your industry particularly is interesting to me because I also got one of these expensive as what guns, massage guns, but I sure as heck don't know how to use this thing. I just, I have it. It's expensive. It's great after runs, but I'd love to know how do I actually use that massage gun to really improve circulation and some other things, right? And so I think there's a way to start thinking about it if you look at it from the customer's perspective and what are the challenges they're facing. And then the other part that becomes very interesting is finding those extreme users, right? If you can go and find like I watched this crazy YouTube, I'm deep into running now, just forgive me. But I saw this crazy YouTube video of this guy running an ultra marathon Moab. I think he was running the Moab 240. And it's like, wow, like you're out of your mind. But those are the type of users, that would be extreme in your world that you want to kind of understand. Because guess what? I guarantee you that guy did not stop running. But I guarantee you what he needs help with is how do I better take care of myself and have self-care post-run, right? And so you can start going and doing that type of observation while at the same time starting to think of brainstorming those new services, right? Like off of that, I think we could just sit and brainstorm probably 50, 60, 70 ideas, and you can pick one or two that you can go and start ideating on, right? Actually building out, right? And validating. So I think it's the key for that type of business where, you're probably not going to have the customer coming back immediately, but you want to start thinking about it, put yourself in their shoes. Your customers are still there. In fact, I would argue you have new customers that you probably didn't reach in the past that you could work with. So I think that's a couple of tips to get going.
And to go off that question, someone asked, why should we design for extreme users? Shouldn't we design for the mainstream?
Yeah, and the idea that's such a good question. The idea is not to design for the extreme user. The idea is to find inspiration around your problem, right? And the other part that's critical is if a lot of times keep in mind this methodology is about innovation and reimagining, right? If you're focused on the average user, you're going to really be designing something that more than likely already exists, right? If you just look at, hey, here's an average user, they're having this problem, I'm actually just going to design for them. Guaranteed, somebody, if not a lot of people, have already figured out that problem and they're working through it. Especially when you're reimagining, you want to think through and find inspiration. That's what this is actually about. It's not so much at the end you're designing for that extreme user, but you've gotten enough inspiration that you understand like, okay, here's the edges around this problem where there's opportunity. And then when you're designing, you're testing it out on more and more people because think about it, the iPhone is a great example. How many of you when the iPhone came out went out and bought one immediately, right? Nobody really, right? I'll admit, I just looked at people that bought iPhones like, why? My flip phone works great, right? It's perfect. It does everything. I don't need these stupid apps. And so the key there is when you're reinventing, you're looking for that inspiration, knowing that you're going to bring the masses along when you're able to drive, get innovation, go through, do the validation, test it, and then scale it out. But just going for the average, you're not really going to be able to get ahead of anything and capture new market.
Yeah, yeah. That made me laugh. I remember I used to take so much pride on my flip phone, and I would answer with such flair. You know, especially when I first got it, I was so proud. Oh my God, I have a cell phone, and flip it. It was so much fun. But um, here's another question,
Yeah.
which I think is pretty interesting. Do you have any tips for empathetic listening, and how does UI UX compare to design thinking?
Those are both good questions. And I think empathetic listening is it takes a lot of practice. Um, and I think some of it is at least my own experience has been to first just try to imagine what the day in the life of the person you're observing or interviewing might have been like. Like I try to just, even before I go in and talk to someone in terms of listening, just try to build a picture in my mind of what their life is like, what their challenges might have been beforehand. Again, that's projecting a little bit of my own bias,
Mm-hmm.
but it also allows me to kind of get out of, sounds kind of counterintuitive, but get out of my own head in terms of what I'm feeling at that time. So I can actually go in and say, okay, well, let me understand what they're doing, how they're thinking. But the other part is how you ask questions. There's actually a really good, I use this book from time to time, Leading with Questions. And this is really about how do you ask open-ended questions that allow you to listen in an empathetic way, right? And so you want to make sure there's actually some tips around how do you do these how do you do open-ended design thinking interviews, right? Contextual interviews. And so that's part of it is really open-ended questions is kind of a piece of it. And then the difference between UX, UI design and design thinking is really, they both, maybe I'll say what is common and then we can talk about what's different. UX, UI design, and design thinking both focus on customer experience. They tend to put the customer and the employee at the center. Uh, where they differ is design thinking can be applied to a range of different problems, whereas a lot of times UI and UX is about that mobile or computer or web interface is that touch point that you're trying to design for. With design thinking, you've seen this used for a range of things. There's even now design thinking is being used for the rethinking, 21st century policing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a wide range of things that design thinking is being used for as a methodology. And I've seen it from, the guy who told me his design thinking saved his marriage all the way to design thinking for solving. I mean, it sounds weird, but actually IDEO does this, these big open, they call it open IDEO, using
Mm-hmm.
design thinking to solve world hunger. Literally, they're using
Yeah.
it that way, right? So
So what if we end with that? That was actually a question I wanted to ask is how might we create a more equitable world? And can we do a quick design thinking exercise just with those in the Zoom to reimagine the policing system in America to be fair?
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we, Digital FastForward, we're launching a new service called We Are Watching. And the whole idea of the service is to track all of the enterprise software and tech companies that pledged, certain support around Black Lives Matter. And so we actually use design thinking to think through what's the best way to drive that engagement. And so I think with this, one of the things that we were looking to do is also begin working with communities to do design thinking sessions on reimagining policing, right, and inviting everybody in. So that's one of the things we're looking at. Haven't started the reimagining sessions, but I think it's an interesting beginning uh, starting point is to think, what is that? How might we look like? Right? Because if you ask the police, right, if we were to go to the police chief and say, okay, let's have a how might we on reimagining the police,
Yeah.
and police chief might say like, well, how might we, how might we keep the community safe while also improving police relations, right? But what do you think, Juliana? Like,
Um, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I like to listen, right? I'm a white presenting woman, even though I'm very Latina. So I just want to listen and support. But I would say, how might we keep Black and Brown communities safe while
yeah,
not killing people?
yeah,
Um, but again, there's people who have, this is a movement by, for, and of the Black community. So I just want to listen and support. But I would love to promote that session, Clay, if
yeah.
you would allow me to.
Yeah, yes. I think we need partners to help us really think through it. But I would also say, as an African American male, that I think it's so important that there's real partnership because I do think this is a systemic problem. And I think, I think what you're seeing, this is a whole separate topic, but I think what you're seeing is there's African Americans, I would say Black and Brown community, who's like, well, this is our problem, but it's not actually our problem, right? And then I think on the other side, there's the like what you're saying, Julia, like I want to support, but I want this group to lead. And I think part of it really has to be an acknowledgement that is systemic. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
if you look at my Facebook page, this whole separate thing, but
Yeah.
I part of the reason why I even want to do the We Are Watching is, me and my wife, we were running with our 16-month-old for all of coronavirus down at Haynes Point. And when all this stuff broke out at the White House, we didn't realize that they had the military out at Haynes Point.
Mm-hmm.
And they literally kicked us out of the park. Like I almost got tased,
Yeah.
you
I was
know?
there. I was by the church.
Yeah, we went, this is Haynes Point, so it's further out, but it was like there was no sign saying the military was out there. We ran, just doing our normal run. Like I was trying to run 10 miles and after 6 miles, they came and said, you guys got to leave. And I'm like, well, why do we have to leave? We've been running here, and they were like, well, sir, you just need to leave because of the pandemic. And I'm like, no, the military's back. Right. And it's interesting to me because when we look at this, like, you know, my wife is Swedish, right? My daughter is mixed. The guy was going to tase me and possibly even tase my wife, right? Because we weren't just like, yeah, we're going to leave. And that's where I do think, definitely the focus should be on where the need is, meaning in terms of keeping Black and Brown communities safe without killing people. But I would even argue the police are just out of control. Like it's just
Yeah.
militarized, right? And it's almost like COVID. It adversely disproportionately impacts Black and Brown people, right? But from a systemic standpoint, it really impacts us all, right? And I think that's becomes the challenge in a situation like this is that we really have to say, it really is it it has to be looked at systemically as it impacts all of us, and then we work together. Obviously, acknowledging who it impacts the most, And I would love to, I would love to use design thinking to really work through this. And I think
Let's
it's
do it.
almost like,
Let's do
yeah.
it.
All right.
And you know what's interesting, Clay, to
Yeah.
your point
Sorry. I
earlier
went on a long tirade.
as you started the presentation, you talked about empathy, and Juliana, you bringing it up, it's like, do a design thinking exercise to figure out how we can, what we can do. Then I'm like, how might we inject or incorporate empathy into policing? I mean,
Right.
like, I just feel like sometimes I just look at the news and I'm like, where is the point where you ask what's going on?
Right.
If there's
There's
something
no
wrong, what can I do to
de-escalation.
help? And usually, even when you meet a stranger, when you're in a strange city, and you might look like you don't know what's going on, usually the first thing they ask, can I help you? And I don't see that part happening oftentimes. So it goes back to how might
It's really
we
powerful.
incorporate empathy, just that one thing into these,
Yeah.
just be kind. How can you just be kind first before being violent, before
But
going, I don't know.
and that's the part that tripped me and my wife out, was like, the guy was going to tase me in front of my 16-month old. It's like, there's no empathy, like, okay. And so I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think another thing about design thinking is that it challenges you to question the assumptions you're making about other people and the world around you. So I wonder what assumptions that police officer made about you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. You hit it on the head.
yeah.
I
So
don't know
as
why
a
I'm
street
laughing about this
entrepreneur,
now. It actually wasn't funny. But looking back
no,
on
but
it.
I'm glad it came up, because as street entrepreneurs, we look for people that are crazy enough to imagine a world that does not exist. Um,
Yes.
so when I think about that, is you have to be crazy enough to imagine a world that doesn't exist, but you also have to be gritty enough to bring it to life. And what we
Yes.
aim to do is to simply connect those individuals with the content, the capital, and the networks they need to solve problems that matter to them. So I think more than an accelerator, we are an organization that is building power, and it is about ensuring that people experiencing the problems have the access, the power, and the capital to solve them. Because we believe that the end user has the experience needed to solve it, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we've been circulating within our community is how might we, as a community, um, set an agenda for a more equitable world. And we were planning a town hall where only Black entrepreneurs would be invited to speak. Allies could listen in, but really led by Black entrepreneurs so that they could set the agenda and tell us what they need and how can we create a more equitable world. So racism isn't new, but I think the momentum for change is stronger than ever, and we don't want that momentum to die. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan, but we think being an anti-racist is completely nonpartisan. So with that in mind, let me just set here a live channel because we are on a Facebook Live. What if instead of a town hall, we do a brainstorm? We do a how might we, a hackathon, reimagine
That's
our
exactly.
world to be more equitable for Black and Brown people. Led by Black and Brown people, and allies can be there to support. How does that sound to you guys?
I think the way
that's a
you
great
framed it
idea.
is really powerful. Yeah.
I love this idea.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Gina has been making T-shirts and selling them to support Black Lives Matter. if you want to do a quick plug for your shirts.
Yeah, I've been hand making t-shirts, and I've just been selling them on Twitter and Instagram. And I actually just had an order shipped out for 5 t-shirts that are going to Starbucks employees so they can wear them at work.
Wow.
Oh,
So
wow,
I'm
nice.
pretty excited about it. Yeah. And
So
I'm not profiting off any of them. All the money is being donated to Black Lives Matter. So.
Nice, very cool. Make sure you share the link so we
please
can,
share the link.
let people know about that as well.
Awesome. Richardson, before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about Pat TV Digital and all the great work you guys are doing.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been a really exciting opportunity to partner with you, with street entrepreneurs, to curate this series that, when Juliana and I first spoke about it, it was really how can we or how might we be able to help our community while this pandemic was going on. I mean, this was like towards the beginning, I believe mid-March. We spoke about the opportunity of putting together these talks to help street entrepreneur members, continue their learning, continue to understand ways that they can continue to grow their business. So when we got together to curate this opportunity, I was very excited. And what I feel like the areas of concentration that we chose were great because those are the things that you need to keep your business going, from marketing to design thinking and ways to raise funds. As our next live session is coming up with Clay Savage, with Clay Savage, with Jake Savage, talking about, I know, we're all in the same space, but just talking about ways to create funds or create funding opportunities for your business. So we're very excited to do this. Clay and also Jake's a clients of ours with Capture Create Media, which Pod TV Digital is an extension of. We do marketing and strategic communications. We create great and dynamic opportunities to create content for your social media channels and your digital presence. So we're truly excited to be here and look forward to expanding this opportunity as we just spoke of today and creating a way to come together using the design thinking strategies to come up with solutions for our communities. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here with us today.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to invest in your skills and your ideas and your businesses. We believe in you. We're here for you. And just as a reminder, we welcome entrepreneurs from all business phases and from all industries. If you want to officially join our accelerator, go to streetentrepreneurs.org and apply. We have something really cool coming up called Founder Retreats, which involve key workshops to start your business in socially distant talent exchange sessions. We're reimagining the workshops actually to be digital, but immersive and interactive. And after every Founders Retreat, participants select the most promising venture for our Street Pitch showcase. Street Pitch is like American Idol meets Shark Tank, but the people watching are the sharks. And they invest in their favorite entrepreneurs through equity crowdfunding so that our participants can get the capital they need to start from actual users. You can watch past Street Pitch competitions or not competitions, showcases on our website. Thank you for tuning in. We have a ton of more workshops coming up. So stay tuned, follow us on social media, and register for the workshop on Eventbrite if you want to get handouts after the session.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Thank you so much.
You were amazing. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
No.